Hello, everybody. Pascal here from Neutrality Studies. It is August the 13th, 2025. And as you all know, in 2 days from now, on August 15th, on Friday, we will see the great Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin meeting in Anchorage, Alaska, in the United States. And currently, there is a lot of chatter on the internet, and there's a lot of discussions online about what this all means and in what sense this could be in what sense this is a genuine approach by the Trump administration and by the Russians to bring the war to an end, or what the strategies are. And I would like to discuss what I think are currently the three most prominent interpretations of what we are seeing going on. The first one is the one that I ascribe to Brian Berletic, who talks of continuity of agenda and division of labor. This school of thought and thinks that what we are seeing is just the latest iteration of a very long string of things which all points toward the United States not actually changing anything in effect and still striving for hegemony, just going and doing it through a different short-term strategy for the moment, but basically just reloading in order then to still achieve the same thing, divide Russia, and then in the end go after China. Then there is a second school that actually believes that Donald Trump currently is simply out of options. He's losing the war and he needs a face-saving way out. And this is what's unfolding. And the third school then interprets Donald Trump as genuinely being interested in peace, as he said during the campaign trail. And what we've seen over the past 6 months has been an up and down, but now Mr. Trump is in the saddle in order to kind of fulfill his campaign promises and the way that his nature would actually drive him, his America First agenda. But let's go through these three bit by bit. I would like to underline that I have no way of proving which one is the right interpretation. Not all of these interpretations are mutually exclusive. They actually do go hand in hand. Sometimes some of the notions, of course, are contradicting each other, and probably only time will tell which one of the three it is. But there are important indications, according to me, of how we can judge what we should believe about what's going on. So let's start with Brian Berletic's continuity of agenda and division of labor argument, which basically holds that over the long term, the United States is not implementing any kind of change in its strategy. It's actually the deep state that more or less governs the behavior of Washington and the US as a foreign policy actor. It never mind who's in charge, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Obama. In the end, it is the interests of the deep state that win out, and these interests are implemented over a long period, right? If we just focus on the moment of what is being said in the current political cycle, then we miss the big picture. And the big picture is that the US still strives for hegemony and still wants to break up Russia, but that it has hit a brick wall the way that it has hit brick walls before. And what it then usually does is it takes one step back, it offers an olive branch, or it pretends to offer an olive branch, and then actually tries to play for time, gain time, and fool the other side into believing that genuine change is coming, all while it just prepares to arm other parts of the world that are then going to execute further proxy wars or what have you. He uses, Brian Berletic often uses the example of the Great Reset that happened under Obama with Hillary Clinton, where Hillary Clinton literally had a reset button and pressing that with Mr. Lavrov, and they were all smiles and haha, and you thought this would be going well, but actually it didn't. It was just a way of gaining more time then to also arm Ukraine. And get another chance at breaking up Russia in the future. Now, and then within this framework, he also argues that what the US is striving for is actually a division of labor. He means with that that the US is striving to leave the war to the Europeans, while pretending to actually withdraw to the Atlantic in order to get more time to to work on confronting and ultimately going to war with China, all while still driving the war in Ukraine through the Europeans and arming the Europeans, and then just go forward with the war there while pretending that that's not what's going on. His interpretation makes very good sense. He has a lot of examples of what underwrites this, including speeches by Pete Hegseth, who actually talked about a division of labor, who said that the Europeans need to step up and need to do more in the war against Russia, and that all of this has also been spelled out in policy papers. Most importantly, in a RAND paper entitled "Overextending Russia" from over 15 years ago, in which the RAND Corporation and the authors of the paper line out how Russia has to be challenged in all of these strategic areas, including in Syria, including in Ukraine and the South Caucasus. And Berletic keeps then emphasizing that, look, this is the playbook, and we have these playbooks, and they go this down bit by bit. It's just as we had a playbook with West Asia, where we had seven countries in 5 years. It didn't happen in 5 years, but the US managed to overthrow in the end 6 out of the 7. The only remaining one that has not been overthrown yet, according to the plan that we've all heard about. And now I forgot the guy's name, but the former US general who talked about this, and the only one standing at the moment is Iran, and we see how the US is still putting extreme pressure and just recently tried to also cause regime change there. So there's very strong evidence that Brian Berletic's interpretation of continuity agenda and division of labor is not at all wrong, and that if you take the long view of what is going on, what this current approach of the Trump administration is just the latest step back and reload and pretense toward Russia in order to win time. Now, my main concern about this interpretation is that it does not take into account the very much provable reality of different factions inside the US. Actually, I mean, Berletic talks about the deep state being having different interests from what individual actors want, and the deep state just winning out time and again, the neocons winning out time and again. But overall, it gives too much weight, in my view, to the sheer the factor of coincidence of what can happen if certain things happen coincidentally happen at the same time, and it gives not enough weight to the actual opposing forces inside the US that do not want to see certain outcomes. And we know that also even within the RAND Corporation, you have people who wrote very different papers. So yes, you had the RAND paper Overextending Russia, but you also had different papers that speak about how Ukraine has to be transformed into a bridge, into a buffer state. You have those as well, and you have different think tanks that all try to vie for power in Congress and that shell out these reports. And you can very much see how the United States is not a unitary actor. And even if we have something like the deep state, we must very much assume that also there you have a diverse range of opinions of what should go on and what should be done. And part of that are the Victoria Nulands and the Victoria Nulands of the world, the Tony Blinkens and the Joe Bidens. But there's also the other part that the Bill Burns, the former CIA directors, the Jack Matlocks, the former U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union, very high-ranking officials and part of the administration of the United States, who have very much different visions, and they sometimes win the debate and they sometimes lose, or they more often than not lose. And it is definitely clear that for the 1990s, the restrainers, the Jack Matlocks and the others, they lost the debate. The US did expand NATO and thought it could, as John Mearsheimer often says, just shove it down the throats of the Russians, and they didn't want to go along with this. But you have other parts as well. One more danger about this first interpretation of continuity of agenda is what Edward Snowden, interestingly, warned us from in a recent essay that he wrote on, I believe it was on Substack, in which he kept emphasizing that there is the danger that if you work too much on the details of what these great powers are doing, that suddenly start interpreting intentionality into patterns, when in fact it is more the outcome of these different coincidental factors that then shape the reality that we're seeing. Not everything is a conspiracy. There are conspiracies, but not everything is planned beforehand to just unravel the way it then does, and how it, in hindsight, all makes sense once you connect the dots. There is a propensity to overconnect dots. We have a psychological propensity to sometimes overconnect dots. And we need to be careful of that, because this is a way of leading ourselves also astray. I'm not accusing Brian Berletic of having done that. I'm not accusing him of being wrong. I'm saying that these are the pitfalls that I do believe are reasonable to keep in mind when we discuss the current event with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Now, the second camp that argues that Trump is out of options to forestall this humiliating defeat, and he's now actually hard-pressed to just find a way out. That interpretation is, of course, still congruent with the continuity of agenda argument, because especially if one of the foreign policy approaches, and I'm now thinking of Ukraine, the proxy war with, or the implementation war of fighting a war with Russia through Ukraine, that foreign policy, that bloody and evil foreign policy, that has hit a brick wall. And if that happens, then, as Berletic argues, you need a way out, right? And you need a change in the short-term approach in order to get to the long-term goal. So overall, this is not yet in contradiction, but it might also hint at if we believe that Donald Trump is doing what he's doing out of a lack of options, it might hint at the genuine desire of Mr. Trump to find a way out of the warfare and actually also live up to the promises he made on the campaign trail. Although in this interpretation, he's more forced back into this position rather than choosing it out of his own free will. This interpretation hints at this not being first and foremost a trap, but a face-saving way out of a more destructive and humiliating situation. And now, if we believe that, then we contradict to a good extent Brian Berletic's interpretation, saying no, this is done intentionally, and this is all part of the plan to fool Russia into agreeing to a policy that is not in its best interest. In Russia's best interest is to just push forward, and never mind what the United States offers and whatnot, because the US just tries to deceive Russia. So you wouldn't try to talk to them, and even worse, you would assume that the US is using negotiations and diplomacy in order to trap you. This is why that part of the debate now also fears very much that Vladimir Putin is being lured into Alaska, where he can be arrested or even killed, right? So if you assume that the United States is doing everything it does out of malevolence and actually tries to trick, then you would assume that even the life of Vladimir Putin could be in danger. Now, the kind of the school that says like, no, he's out of option, they would argue that, or they do argue that this is an important meeting for Donald Trump in order to find this off ramp that can save his presidency, to prevent that what happened to Biden with Afghanistan, Biden being now forever the man who lost the war in Afghanistan, trying to prevent that from happening to him with Ukraine, that he now needs a political way to basically take the United States out of its free will, in order then, once everything collapses, to be able to say like, look, we told you the Europeans are incapable, and this war is basically this war was never our war, it was Biden's war, and we actually took the responsible decision of not prolonging it, right? We're the ones who basically set the terms of how to end it, and thereby he's not the man who lost Ukraine, he's the man who decided to to give it up and to undo a mistake of the past. This then hints at it suggests that what we are seeing is not just a short-term damage. No, sorry. What this suggests is that short-term damage control that Mr. Trump has to do now overwrites actually long-term strategic goals of the deep state, which is something that, of course, the continuity of agenda school will contradict and will say like, no, it is still in line. But here we have people who say like, no, the short-term trumps the long-term, because the long-term goal was to use the Ukraine war, the proxy war, in order to shatter Russia. And this is something that the Europeans and the neocons in the United States still want to do. They still argue that with the right now and talking to Putin and giving in to Putin is a strategic mistake. We just need to double down, and if we double down long enough and then we do bone-crushing sanctions and we punish third states, then we will isolate Russia, and in the end Russia will crack, it will break, and Ukraine will win back all of its territories, and it's going to be a great strategic victory for the United States. Basically, the people in the US who still think that they can pull off another Soviet Union, right? They can break Russia the way that Soviet Union could be broken with maximum pressure, and you just need to keep arm, spend, and in the end, the other one will break because they are weak and we are strong. And that's so people who then think that this is a struggle between these two and that Donald Trump actually is forced out of this war would interpret what's going on as a victory of short-term needs over these neocon long-term goals. It also suggests that preventing the utter destruction of Ukraine is actually one of the motivations of Trump, as he used to say on the campaign trail, and hence the Europeans opposing this then create these big question marks. And Alexander Mercuries from the Duran actually said so, that he's baffled, as this means that the Europeans are the ones willing to fight to the last Ukrainian, whereas the Americans are the ones who are officially saying that, look, this is a bloodbath and it needs to end, and all of these young beautiful men in Ukraine and in Russia, they don't need to die. We actually can end this on the negotiating table, whereas it is the Europeans who are currently asking for more blood to flow on the Ukrainian battlefield instead of accepting military realities and at least prevent the last part, this defeat, this utter military defeat, during which, by the way, usually most of the casualties on the defeated side occur, to prevent that from having another couple of 100,000 deaths on the Ukrainian side. Now, this is very well. It's of course possible that this is one of the things that motivates Donald Trump, but it then feeds in more into the third school, which argues that, look, Donald Trump actually genuinely is interested in peace. This is actually not just his way of getting to end a humiliating situation. It's one of the things that he wants to achieve, but it's not the overarching goal. The overarching goal, the third school says, is for Donald Trump to be, of course, the peacemaker that he claims he is, get his Nobel Peace Prize, and actually achieve larger America First, MAGA foreign policy goals, including extricating the United States from this toxic relationship with the Europeans, including coming to a grand bargain with the Russians, that then also could include something like access to Russian rare earths, because the US recently learned that it is overly dependent on Chinese rare earths, and this is one of the reasons why the United States hit brick wall. But when it comes to this war, that they are realizing that there are these strategic vulnerabilities that they just cannot overcome, and that this is something that Trump is working on, the visionary project of actually the spheres of influence, spheres of interest, in which the Trump administration, with people like Marco Rubio, in January of this year actually said, look, the multipolar system is a reality. We, the United States, are just one of the poles, but we need to accept that the Russians and the Chinese are there there as well, and that nations run on their own interests, and that we try to negotiate each other's interests, but we try to win on our side, right? And that what we are currently seeing is actually the actualization of this overarching worldview of even the Trump administration agreeing to a multipolar system. The question is just, how do you get out of the mess that the old mindset actually caused? Now, this interpretation is, of course, at odds with Brian Berletic's interpretation. It's also partially at odds with the school that says, like, look, this is overall just a strategic necessity, because it ascribes to Donald Trump larger ambitions, and to the United States as being actually in a process of changing its overall foreign policy approach, right? And there are moments in which foreign policy drastically changes in the United States. The 1940s were one of these moments. I never get tired of reminding people that for 150 years, one of the two pillars of the US foreign policy strategy was actually neutrality, US neutrality. That neutrality went hand in hand with the Monroe Doctrine, and went hand in hand with bloody expansionism, first on the North American continent, then up into Hawaii, then into the possessions of Spain, and the War of Mexico, and then in the end a war with Spain and getting the Philippines, right? The US was an expansionary power, but it was also an expansionary power that used excessively this policy of neutrality towards Europe. Europe was something the US in the 19th century and for the first part of the 20th century didn't want to get involved in. It took a break from this policy toward the end of the First World War, when it actually went to war, but it withdrew again across the Atlantic. And then you had a very strong internal opposition to a renewed engagement, even in the Second World War. You had neutralists in the United States when we today talk about isolationism and the isolationist policies of the 1920s and 30s. These policies are all called neutrality acts. They're done by people. Actually, the America First Committee were part of them, that said, like, the United States has to be neutral toward Europe, because nothing good has ever come out of this continent, or the best of it having been the independence of the United States, right? And then there was the 1940s and the war, and then there was a genuine change in that approach. And the change was, of course, NATO, right? As Ismay Hastings, the first General Secretary of NATO, used to say, NATO exists in order to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down, right? So that was the overall strategy why you would make such an alliance, but it actually meant a departure from the previous US foreign policy approach. Now, the people who say that Donald Trump has this genuine interest in peace and a multipolar setup with the United States as maybe the primus inter pares, but accepting that there are others as well, they imply that we are currently going through another profound change. They can then link this change to the multipolar world and to the reality of it, and then also point to several speech acts of US foreign policymakers, including Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, and so on, who all said, look, we need to get along with these other great powers, and we want to avoid war, including, like, of course, Donald Trump in his commencement speech in January, actually arguing that his administration will be remembered for the wars that the US ended, but also for the wars it never got the US involved in. And so we have this tension. And the tension then is, of course, can we believe that? And if we believe that this is a true belief, that this is a true intention of the Trump administration, what do we make out of the deep state and the fact that the deep state, time and again, also in the past, has managed to overturn such inclinations? And we have nobody less than Vladimir Putin, who told us in interviews that he had a good relationship with a lot of US presidents over the time, and he had good negotiations with them, and they came to agreements and then, or to understandings, and 2 weeks later the tune from Washington would change, and his conclusion is, of course, that these presidents then were visited by certain people from the CIA and from other institutions who explained to them, look, this is not how we do things. And that you actually have not only a deep state, but that you have this factions inside the US that can be pretty strong and either threaten administrations. And we currently don't know what Donald Trump is all being threatened with, including the Epstein files, including the all of the compromise that the Israelis might have on the US. So you can threaten them on the one hand in order to push them into certain policies. On the other hand, you can also just string them along. And stringing along in foreign policy can happen from the ground. I recall that it was not a grand strategy of the Japanese to just have a war with China in 1931. This was very much instigated because the Japanese army, just one group within the army actually blew up a railway line in Manchuria, and they then claimed, oh, it was an attack from some Chinese not rebel groups. They called them, like today they will call them terrorists, but there was this thing like bandits, and the provocation from China, and therefore we have to go all in. And they managed to string along the politicians in Tokyo who didn't plan this to happen in that way. But it was definitely a part of a today we would just call it a fails flag attack, but it was part of the army. So one part of the decision-making process in Imperial Japan that then managed to string another part along. And in the same sense, today we know about the overwhelming presence of the CIA in Ukraine. We know about the presence of these different NGOs, and that these NGOs don't necessarily listen to the US president, because otherwise the president wouldn't have had to cut the funding through USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy to them. So we have indications that tell us that there are various actors, US actors or US sponsored actors, that still have, of course, the potential of stringing an administration along. Now, again, if we suppose that Donald Trump is genuine, it still leaves open the question: is this genuine intention also one that is genuinely that reflects a genuine change of U.S. deep state foreign policy approach? One of the things it implies, the people who say, like, look, this is the big change, this is what we've been waiting for, it implies that Donald Trump is not just this outlier from outside the political process that came in order to fix the system before the system collapses Soviet style and before you have a civil war, in order to correct the US internally. But it also implies that that you have an entire that you have a group of people now, the restrainers, who do or are in front of our eyes winning over the more violent part of the US, the neocons and the Hillary Clintons, the Victoria Nulands, the Walrus guy, this part of the United States is now de facto losing power within the system of the US. This leaves us with certain problems, of course. I mean, you cannot talk away the fact that you did have a 12-day war in Iran, and that you did have the United States that even bragged about using diplomacy as a ploy to fool the Iranians. So, and this would, of course, hint at and Mr. Berletic being correct, saying, like, look, at the end of the day, nothing has seriously changed. We can make up an explanation for this and can say, like, look, there was this argument recently that it was the Israelis. This one was an Israeli attack on Iran, and they managed to string along the United States. They managed to bring the US in such a situation in which they then had to pretend that they planned it from the beginning, and that it was all this great victory, but that this is not something that was planned first and foremost by Washington, but that was later on conceptualized by Washington and Israel for strategic purposes, for PR purposes, as having been long in the making, right? So this can be an explanation in line with the benign interpretation of what the United States is currently doing. The benign interpretation is also contradicted by the United States over the last 6 months, Donald Trump following the neocon lines and trying actually to threaten Russia, the bomb-crushing sanctions, and even now in the last 2 months, talking about how to isolate Russia further, and that he's, Donald Trump being very, very disappointed, and even threatening China and other states that if they continue trading and buying oil, just like India, if India continues buying oil, they will face 100% or more tariff, so as to continue to put pressure on Russia. Now, the explanation again that from the benign school is coming is that, look, Donald Trump was overall just he was just fooled. He was fed the wrong information, and we know that in his cabinet he has certain very realistic characters and peace-minded characters, including Tulsi Gabbard, including to a large extent RFK Jr., although when it comes to Israel, everything's different there. But we have Tulsi Gabbard, you have J.D. Vance, who you, of course, have Mr. Witkoff, who's a close, not only an envoy of Donald Trump, but also an advisor, who are um, who, if they're to believe of all the things that they've said over the time, would rather advise him to caution. But we also know that he has part of the neocon establishment in his cabinet, including Rubio, including Hegseth, that might be pushing very much in the other direction. And we know that depending on what kind of information Donald Trump is fed, and if he has been fed with this belief that, look, just 3 more weeks of sanctions and Russia will collapse. Actually, the Russian casualties on the battlefield are huge, right? They cannot keep this up. The airlines are going to break soon. If he has been given that kind of information, then it would explain why he believed that he can continue doing what the US has been doing. But overall, he now had to learn that their assessments were wrong. And actually what we're seeing now is him coming to the conclusion that he needs to listen to the other part, and that we are now seeing a coordinated effort that has been in the making for quite a while, also in secret negotiations with the Russians, of creating a way out, maybe face saving only, maybe grand strategic overall, but that this is why we've seen these belligerent tunes from Washington. And here again, I need to point out, neither of this interpretation we can check whether they are true or not. We can just say that they are there, and these are the ways in which we can try to understand what's going on around us. And it is very much possible that maybe the Trump administration and others actually have a genuine belief, but that in the end the deep state will win over, or that we are actually seeing the cracks in the deep state, and that the larger structure of the international system is now mandating, or is making it inevitable, that the United States comes to some sort of change. Although we also know that the neocon faction still very much wants to go a completely different route, and the Europeans want to go different route. They still believe that they can win this thing on the battlefield. So Donald Trump trying to do something else does need this explanation. The Trump this it's maybe a last point. The benign version also suggests now that if it comes, if this change of grand strategy actually comes, then what we actually see is this long-term change, right? Long-term against the neocons, and that we actually then would see this also in other theaters, that we would see it toward the Middle East, that we might even see it toward China. And this is then still, of course, where I think Brian Berletic has a very strong argument in saying, like, how realistic is it? I mean, the Trump administration has been highly belligerent towards China. Even people who are great realists in the US, like John Mearsheimer, are belligerent towards China in the sense that they believe that the security competition between Beijing and Washington is inevitable, and hence you need to gear up and to make sure that this peer competitor will not rise above a certain threshold of military and economic power. Now, again, it's frustrating in the sense that I cannot give you a clear answer of which interpretation is correct. I do think all three are equally plausible. All three have you find arguments for and against all three of them, and that's why I do think it's the best way of thinking about this is about pessimistic interpretations in terms of peacemaking, optimistic interpretations, and somewhere in between maybe the necessity school sitting in between, which does interpret the current events as an outcome of, the short-term necessities of everything. And this does not, in this case, of course, that the war is lost and that now Donald Trump and so on, they recognize that because they actually do have the necessary intelligence to judge of that. And I will make a program about this another day. We know that the military intelligence that is available is actually realistic. We know that the BS we're being fed through the media is what certain parts of the establishment want the gullible population to believe. But we know that militarily, the Pentagon has actually a much better understanding of what's happening, and that now this necessity is driving these peace talks. Whichever it is, we will see in the near future how the Russians will work with this, because I am pretty certain that they too are currently working on figuring out which scenario we are looking at, and trying on the one hand not to fall into a trap, on the other hand not to let go of a potential opportunity. Because if one person understands the value of an ally on the other side of the Atlantic, I think it is Vladimir Putin, and that you do actually also need to fight against your own system and your own saboteurs that do this in one way or another. And sometimes when we see these leaks in the United States of people familiar with the matter, sometimes this is a story being planted in line with an administration's course of actions, and sometimes it is done in order to sabotage them, right? And sometimes these leaks are supposed to prevent certain policies from happening. And as we are speaking 2.5 days before the summit meeting, we know that there are people in Europe, in Ukraine, who are still going to try to sabotage the summit because they are so scared of what might come out of it. I leave you with this. Thank you very much for your attention. See you next time.